You'll see it on Saturdays in Show World in the Austin American-Statesman. It's a column called TV, Kids, and You. To meet the author of this column and to learn more about this relevant subject, stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, welcoming you to this edition of the show. And we have today a very special guest who is a columnist of what you'll find in the Austin American-Statesman, but also in some 30 papers around the country in a syndication. It's entitled TV, Kids, and You, and the author of this is Diana Dawson, who's with us today. Diana Dawson, I can't tell you how excited I am about your being with us.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
I've been reading your column, and you know, I just have never seen anything like it. You're out there each week giving parents some guidelines about television and relationship to their families.
Well, I come at it from the perspective of a parent.
You're of a 5-year-old, I
right,
understand.
a 5-year-old, and we'll be having our second in July.
Oh, really?
So we'll make it through several more years of television programs
All right.
for kids.
Well, congratulations on
Thank
that
you.
forthcoming event.
Thanks.
Well, tell us how you got started on this column and why you're doing it.
Well, I got into this in sort of a roundabout way. I had worked as a newspaper reporter for 15 years, mostly covering social issues, poverty, welfare, foster care, things like that. Mm-hmm. And when my son turned 1, I decided that I would never get the time back with him and wanted to be able to be the person to nurture his creativity and passion for learning and things like that. So I stepped out of the newsroom. And a friend with whom I'd worked at the Kansas City Star years before called, and at that time he was then vice president of TV Data, one of the largest listings agencies in the country that provides newspapers with television listings and features. And
I see.
And he knew my writing and reporting, and he said, we've just started a feature syndicate, and if you have any ideas for a nationally syndicated column on television, I'd love to hear them. Mm-hmm. I'd love to have you do it. And I started ranting and raving about how I couldn't stand television, how we never had it on in the house because we didn't want our son exposed to it,
right.
And that it was just awful, and what could I possibly do? And he said, well, take that passion and come up with something. So I said, well, somebody could pick a pick of the week for parents and young children to watch together and then offer discussion questions and activities based on that. And 2 weeks later, he called back and said, our board voted and you're in development.
Wow.
And I said, well, somebody could do it, but it turned out to be me.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
you had
been
the
fun.
idea, and now you're doing it.
Right.
And what other places around the country are carrying the column?
To name a few, the Chicago Sun-Times is the largest, and then it's also in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It's in several papers in California, the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington, the Santa Fe paper. It was in the Albuquerque paper for a while.
Okay. Well, I think the fact that it's picked up that kind of interest means that you're really meeting a need in more than a local way here, and we're delighted that here in your hometown they're carrying it too. And I'd like to just bring up on the monitor here an example of one of the columns that you wrote recently that I thought sort of gave an idea of your approach. This one about LRB looks at kids and divorce, and this is just last part of last month.
Right. I love that program.
And tell us how you happen to make that choice for that one.
I will probably write about almost any Nick News special that Linda Ellerby produces.
Nick is Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon.
Okay.
She has a special knack for picking some of the toughest subjects for children to deal with, and pulling children in as panelists. In this one, She had kids 8 to 14 years old. And eliciting their experiences and getting them to talk about their views of the issue.
Yeah.
She's also handled children with disabilities and other issues like that.
Okay. Well, just take a look at this here for a moment in terms of the questions that you had posed for parents to discuss with their children after they see this. If your parents are not divorced, do you ever think about the issue? And if they are divorced, do you ever feel like you get caught in the middle?
Right. Linda said that she had changed the title of her program once on the day of the taping because the kids kept talking about being caught in the middle of the divorce issue.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And
And that's what it's called, isn't
right,
it?
right. And one of the reasons I chose this was that I thought that it gave parents and children a lot of opportunities for conversation to really discuss the issue.
Well, you know, one of the things, too, that I sort of take away from this is that by suggesting to family members, talk about what you're looking at.
Right.
Be interactive. Even before the age of digital interactive television, you can be
Right.
interactive right now. Get outside the box, break the hypnotism and the spell, and use that as an occasion to learn and to develop relationships within the families.
Right. That's the whole goal behind my column. Research has shown that a lot of times kids, when they're watching television by themselves, are just sitting there and the term that a lot of people use is they're zoning out. They're almost in a catatonic state staring at the television. And so the goal of this column is to get them thinking rather than to shut everything down while they're watching television, and to build on what they learn and pick up from the good shows and inspire them to take that further.
Yeah. Tell us how you make your selection of shows to highlight.
I receive the listings of what will be on television a month in advance.
Okay.
And so it lands on my doorstep every Saturday morning. And I skim through the listings. Some shows I know I won't write about. And then I'll usually have a half a dozen that look like good contenders for parents and children under the age of 12 to watch together. And from that, then I'll begin calling publicists for those shows and requesting preview tapes. And I may watch a couple of shows in a given week to decide what I want to write about that week. And I'm always looking for something that leaves the children with a little something, with the desire to go and draw a picture of Panama and put the correct animals in the rainforest, or with questions about divorce or music, whatever.
So you have kind of a universe of programs to choose from.
Sure.
You look at the titles, you see what is maybe of some interest to you and to
Right.
viewers, and you can get preview tapes of these.
Usually I can. Sometimes there are good programs that are on television that I've not been able to write about because the tapes have not been available a month in advance.
Oh, I see.
And I won't write about any program without either previewing it or reading a script, because I want to make sure of the quality and be sure that they haven't slipped something in there that would be inappropriate for kids.
Okay, now you've been doing the column how long?
About a year and a half,
Okay, and so you've written almost every week?
every week.
Every week. I mean, that's like 70 articles that you've written.
Right.
Give us some examples of some other topics that you've touched on.
Well, there was a wonderful special that aired on Nickelodeon last Mother's Day, a Rugrats special about a boy who had lost his mother. And in fact, a couple of school counselors called me and told me that they used that column and picked up the program to use in counseling children at school. I thought that was an especially nice program. There have been other programs that have not been geared toward children, but I've made fit. PBS did a great series featuring a nun, Sister Wendy.
Oh, yes,
and her
on the
tour,
art.
tour
Uh-huh.
of art. And
Right.
I used one of those episodes because Sister Wendy was so down to earth. It was a great way to introduce children to great art
Right.
in not a, as I think, as I said in my column, not a bent pinky kind of way. So
Bent pinky?
A bent pinky kind of way.
I'm not familiar with that phrase.
So I, I like to get parents to encourage their children to view up rather than view down
I see. Okay.
if they can.
And so you do use some programs that are not produced specifically for children,
Right.
but that the kids might watch.
Right.
Other examples of that?
The Sister Wendy series was a good example. Discovery Channel has had some good programs on things like dinosaurs or sharks, things like that, that I've used. I try to pick a topic that children are interested in, like the dinosaurs or sharks,
Sure, right.
and then go from there.
Uh-huh.
And then I keep my eyes out for other scientific or historical or musical programs that there might be a little bit of an entry for kids into.
Well, now, let's turn for a moment to the children's programmings per se.
Sure.
I mean, there's this act that says that there's supposed to be, the Congressional Act of, what was it, 1990, that's now just kind of being brought into play.
Right.
It said by a certain date last fall that each of the networks was to produce 3 educational hours of educational programs for children.
Right. And that sent a lot of them scurrying.
And you think it's working?
I'm not exactly sure. I would have to sit down with every program they claim to be educational and take a look at that. I've seen some programs labeled as educational that I've previewed a half-an-hour episode and,
Yes.
and have thought, where?
Yeah, how?
I don't get it. And if I don't get it, well, the kids. But others are doing a wonderful job. I think ABC really rose to the challenge with its Saturday morning lineup. And they have a great new science program called Science Court, which is funny and flashy, but very informative for children.
Right. We're going to come back to that in the second half of the show, just to keep thinking about some of these other
Okay.
ones that you recommend. Before we take our break, though, I'd like to have your email address put up there. Folks who would like to be in touch with you and give you some feedback, can you recite that for us? It's there on the monitor, and I can't quite read it.
Sure, it's Diana Daw, D-A-W, at AOL.com.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear from anybody
Good,
if they have.
good. Okay, well, we'd love to have you folks stay with us for just another 15 minutes after we take this break. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we're having just a great conversation with Diana Dawson, who is the columnist of the what you see in the Statesman on Saturday Show World section called Kids, TV, and You. And Diana, in the first half, we were just beginning to get into some of the programs that you recommend that are produced specifically for children, that you were naming a few there. Can you keep on going with that?
Sure. I think we had started by talking about ABC's Science Court. There are quite a few science programs that are great for kids. One of my favorites is Magic School Bus on PBS. Also, like Kratz Creatures. They're two brothers, a zoologist and I think biologist, who explore different animals with children, and that's a super program. Sherry Lewis has a new special, the Charlie Horse Music Pizza.
Yeah, that's one thing that we have to show our viewers. That was in one of your columns. Let's bring that up and tell us why you like that.
I think it's one of the first. Sherry sort of backs away from calling it a music appreciation program for kids, but I think in a way that's what it is. You can find a lot of good science programs and some history and things like that on TV, but there are very few programs that are true musical programs for children. And what Sherry does is, through very natural means of comedy and her familiar characters of Lamb Chop and Hush Puppy and all of the rest, she introduces kids to a musical concept each week. One week they might be talking about notes. One week they might be, doing scales, different things like that. And she presents it in a way, through repetition and humor, that they get it by the end of the show.
Yeah. And I noticed that for parents, you have the suggestion that they form their own family band.
Right.
Using pots and pans.
That's right. Pots and pans and paper towel rolls, with saran wrap on the end and rice in the middle. Just march around and make some noise as a family.
Yeah. Another way of the family getting out of the box into real life and letting television become a teaching tool.
Sure.
I had the pleasure back in 1990 of interviewing Bill Moyers when he was here for the premiere of Amazing Grace, the PBS special. And he was saying at that time that he sees television as the great classroom of the nation. That he does what he does because it's educational in its effect. And especially with PBS, you don't have to be meeting the bottom line sort of thing in the way you do with commercial television. And that I see that you're seeing television as like a classroom in a sense.
I think that it can be, and that comes down to, good selection. Again, you have to weed through everything that's out there and pick out the things that really will support your child's learning and nurture his creativity and passion for learning. I get so excited when I listen to my own 5-year-old who will be watching something on PBS, and he likes even the adult programs on PBS, and he'll yell from upstairs, "They're teaching me how to build a house. They're teaching me how to make pasta."
Yeah.
And you want to find things that support that kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, right.
In any way you can.
Yeah, well, that's good. And before the show, you were telling me that you're pretty discriminating about the shows that you let him watch.
I am.
There's a rationing that goes on in your home as far as the diet of.
Right. It was funny. I talked to an elementary school last year, and one of the third graders came up to me and said, "I wish I were your son because I could watch TV all the time." And I said, "Absolutely not." Research is showing that by the time most kids get out of school, they will have spent more time watching television than in the classroom.
Right, right.
And we limit it. He rarely watches more than an hour of television a day. There may be a 2-hour special, but then the next day that's balanced.
I see. And you use a lot of videos, you were saying.
Right, right. I'm fortunate because by writing this column, I have tapes of things that I've previewed a month in advance, and I've already found them to be free of violence and bias of any type, and have some redeeming value, and so he makes most of his choices from that rack.
Another guest we've had on the show in the past is John Wright from out of the University of Texas, who is the head of the children research on the effects of television on young folks, particularly the issues of violence.
Right.
And he said that as a grandfather, he has a whole shelf of good videotapes, I mean, of good TV fare, that between that and mostly what they find on PBS, that is the viewing diet
Right.
within his family.
And I think parents should use videotapes more often because, especially think about the working parents. They're only home during prime time, and there's so little on during prime time for children. But why can't they watch Sesame Street at 7 o'clock at night,
Right.
even if they're not home at 8 in the
Right,
morning
right.
for it?
Or Mr. Rogers,
Right, Mr. Rogers,
who
Magic
happens to
School
be
Bus.
a Presbyterian minister.
That's right, and a wonderful communicator for children.
Yeah, right. Well, I have to say that our host station here got a nice little commendation from Diana Holloway. Diane said in her column back in September when the season was
Right.
just starting, children's TV is growing up. Despite the vagueness of FCC mandate, experts see improvement in the fall schedules and in the commercial field as well as, of course, in
Right.
the PBS. And the one that she refers to in KNVA is Kids Ideas. A host is a 12-year-old, Chelsea Hernandez, and the program is in Spanish.
That's wonderful. If that were national, I'd love to write about something like that.
Yeah,
But
and I think it's an example of how local stations could be and probably should be into producing
Sure.
quality programming, as well as depending on what comes over the networks. I'd like to also just take note of the fact that one of the classrooms, the educational venues in our society, are within congregations.
right.
Synagogues and churches and mosques and the whole realm of diversity that is here today. How much do you think the religious community should be addressing the issues of religion, television, and children?
I think that one of the roles of the church can be in helping to educate the congregation about media literacy, helping to let them know that that parents should guide their children's choices, that it's not okay anymore to just go off and make breakfast and let the child go off with the remote control, that the parents have to help make choices to weed out bias and violence and things like that, and maybe help guide the families in terms of what programs are there that support values that the church or the parents want to present to the children and support education.
Well, I think that through the Austin Metropolitan Ministries, we've set up what's called the Austin Media Literacy
Right.
Network to disseminate options in this regard and help folks take responsibility for their relationship to television, both for themselves and their families. And I would like to one more time put up your email address in case people weren't with us in the first half to see how they can get a hold of you with some ideas or requests or
Sure.
feedback. And I think we also should take note of the fact that the media literacy has to do with not just with children,
Right.
but anybody who is tempted to become a couch potato.
Right.
And that
We can all make better choices.
yeah, and that Peggy Charon, who is heading up this particular work with children and television, had the TLC. We've kind of promoted this in churches here. The T stands for talking to your young ones about what they're looking at.
Right.
L is to look at it with them. And C is to choose for them if they're little and with them if they're older.
Sure.
Do you like that?
I like it. She's the grandmother of educational television, and I think she hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. I think she's maybe also the one that called the network to task that was trying to pass off the Flintstones as archaeologically educational.
She did, and more power to her for it.
I mean, when you're looking at these so-called educational programs, you're looking at them pretty closely, I'm sure.
Right, right. And I don't think that the networks are trying to get away with quite as much as they did when the act first passed. That this time around, I think they're taking their task a little bit more seriously. People like Peggy Charon took them to task for what they did
Yeah.
and their lack of sincerity before, and I don't think that's happening again.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to make Power Rangers pass an educational test. Right?
It wouldn't for me
Yeah.
at all.
What about Saturday morning cartoons? What's your feeling about those?
Some are labeled educational, and I watch an episode and say where, but some are very good. ABC Science Court again is in that
Yeah.
lineup. There's also a new program called Pepper Ann about a sort of the Doug equivalent from Nickelodeon of a young girl growing up, and it deals with some of the issues she faces, and that can be pretty good. So Saturday morning programming is getting better on some of the networks. It's not where I'd like to see it
I see.
totally yet.
Yeah. Still too much violence, would you say?
I think the violence is being weeded out. I don't think there's as much violence as there was a couple years ago, but there are just some programs that don't leave children with anything. If I watch an episode and I can't think of any discussion question to
Right.
pose
Oh, I see.
or activity
Yeah.
to pose,
Right.
I wonder what that show's offering
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. Why?
And so I won't write about it then.
Right.
But the ones that inspire me and give me a lot of ideas for questions and activities and things like that, I think they must be much more inspirational to children too.
Right. In the minute we have left, I want to just make reference to the fact that the Time Warner Cable Company that is carrying all the stations in town by that means has produced what is called Learn to Take Charge of Your TV, a family guide to TV viewing that picks up on the principles of media literacy.
That's a great guide.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your insights with us today, Diana Dawson.
Enjoyable.
And we'd like to ask you folks to stay with us again next week when we're coming to you with our continuing series on a variety of subjects that deal with the religious issues that can have to do with television, can have to do with homelessness, can have to do with the arts. And we're glad to have you join us on any Sunday, and particularly on this day. Thank you for being with us. I'm Richard Thompson, and peace be with you.